let's start. Welcome everybody. This is our first seminar of this semester. Thank you very much for being here. We are very fortunate to have this today. Dr. Stommel from Roundabout University is going to be speaking to us about miscommunication and repair in Dutch task-oriented human-robot interaction. I'm really looking forward to this talk. Before the presentation starts, a couple points of housekeeping for you. Dr. Stommel will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions. We can keep microphones mute through our speaker's presentation, that will be handy. If you want to ask something, please do feel free to use the hand function. Raise your hand, turn your cameras on, and turn your microphone, and ask those questions on screen. And if you do want to have your cameras on during the presentation, please feel free to do so. It's nice. I think it's nicer for Dr. Stommel to feel that you are talking to an audience rather than just a screen. So the seminar is being recorded today and may be uploaded to the YouTube later. So just be aware of that. If you have any concerns or questions, cameras off is probably the way to go. Okay, without any further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Stommel. Please take it away.
So first of all, thank you very much, of course, for the invitation to present my research in your seminar series. And to a certain extent, I may have been given this opportunity thanks to the pandemic and our acquired convenience in using these remote technologies. So thank you, COVID, and thank you also, Jessica Robles, for inviting me. It's a great honor. I will be talking today about a relatively fresh project I've been working on, which is on robot-guided survey interactions. And I am particularly pleased to talk about this research because I'm currently working on a major Horizon Europe grant proposal together with your colleagues Sol Albert and Liz Stoko, who I've also seen in the room. And this grant proposal is basically about the topic of today's talk, namely miscommunication and repair in human-agent interaction. So to some extent, you could see my presentation today in that light, in the light of that larger project. The particular study of today I did with my Radboud research master student Lynn de Rijk, and also the person who developed the Pepper robot we will be looking at, who is a developer and a computer scientist, Roel Bouwmans, also working at Radboud University. So that's just to provide you with a little bit of context. Now, let's move on. Basically, I would like to start with a provoking statement, which was done by two prominent researchers in the field of human-agent interaction, which is that, in fact, robots are unable to lead a half-decent, coherent conversation with a human. So from this basic proposition, it is already very interesting to look at human-agent interaction. But we also found that, or more specifically my colleague Roel, that participants interacting with robots, at least in his project on survey robots, are actually quite positive about the interaction with the robot. So there seems to be something like a tension there. And given that already multiple researchers and scholars have reflected on human-agent interaction as a sequentially organized structure, like sequentially organized moves around requests and responses, we may understand that for surveys, they may actually work quite well. And this has also been found by others. For example, Walker and colleagues use a virtual agent as a tool, a diagnostic tool, basically, very similar to the survey structure, the question-answer structure. So potentially, robots can do a good job at doing surveys. However, as we know, there are already, it's quite familiar to all of you probably, that talking to a robot or a virtual agent all kinds of miscommunications occur, and they are very likely to also occur in robot-guided surveys. So our starting question was, what types of miscommunication occur in this context, and how do they get resolved? Now, miscommunication obviously relates to the mechanisms of repair that we are familiar with in social interaction. So basically, troubles of speaking, hearing, and understanding are resolved with various kinds of repair mechanisms, ways of dealing with and resolving those troubles. We also know from my Nijmegen colleague Mark Dingemans and colleagues, that in social interaction repair is very frequent, so once every 1.4 minutes on average. And basically, in the field of human human agent interaction, there has been some attention to error detection and recovery, but relatively little CA or EMCA research, with some exceptions. For example, Pelikan and Broth, who studied a now robot and found that repair is actually one of the mechanisms used to adapt to the robot. So humans display their initial assumptions about the robot, what the robot may or may not be able to process, and then adapt accordingly upon over the course of multiple turns and sequences. So with this basis of previous research in mind, I'll briefly tell you a little bit about our particular data set. The data consisted of 36 health survey interviews conducted by a Pepper robot. You saw the Pepper robot on the first slide, but I'll show it to you again. This interview consisted of 52 questions, and the interview was prepared with 3 test questions, so to say, for the participant to practice the interaction with Pepper. Before the actual interview started, the nurse provided a couple of instructions of how to deal with the robot, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So in total, we had around 12 hours of video recordings of these interactions with Pepper, and the average interview duration was 20 minutes, including the test questions. Now, the instructions by the nurse were the following. First of all, she explained that if Pepper is silent, this means it hasn't heard you. She also explained that if you say, "Hoe bedoel je?" or "What do you mean?" Pepper will repeat the question. And the third instruction is, if you say skip or overslaan, Pepper will proceed to the next question. Then there was another programmed aspect in the interviews, namely after each question, Pepper would say, after each question, Pepper does an understanding check, so repeating the participant's answer, and if then the answer to the understanding check was no, then Pepper would recycle the question, and this happened in 54 cases. So for 36 interviews, it could have happened maybe twice or maximum 3 times in an interview. Then another instruction or pre-given information after long silences, Pepper says is programmed to say, "I haven't heard your answer yet." And this occurred only 3 times. So this is just as a basic description of how Pepper works and how it was programmed and how the participants were instructed to deal with Pepper. Okay, let's look at some data. This is a first example of the setup. You can see Pepper on the right and the participant on the left. These participants, by the way, were not patients of the hospital, but were specifically recruited to do this general health survey. So in these 12 hours of data, what we found was overwhelmingly overwhelmingly participants repeating and rephrasing their answers to Pepper. So altogether, 239 repeats, articulated repeats of answers, and 51 rephrasals. I will, because the repeats are so common, I will show you multiple examples of repeats in the next fragments, but we will first watch a relatively simple fragment or question-answer sequence, which occurs around 12 minutes into the interview. So the participant is trained to a certain extent, you could say, to deal with Pepper. And the sequence runs relatively smoothly up to the understanding check. I'll play the video.
Ja.
Dan gaan we naar de volgende vraag. Hoe tevreden bent u met uw gezondheid?
7.
U zegt dat uw tevredenheid met uw gezondheid het cijfer 7 krijgt. Klopt dat?
Klopt. Sorry, ja.
De volgende vraag.
Okay, I will play it once more.
Ja.
Dan gaan we naar de volgende vraag. Hoe tevreden bent u met uw gezondheid?
7.
U zegt dat uw tevredenheid met uw gezondheid het cijfer 7 krijgt. Klopt dat?
Klopt. Sorry, ja.
De volgende vraag.
Okay. So this is the transcript, and I should explain that the blue bar on the left side is an indication of the ears and eyes of Pepper glowing blue, and this happens when Pepper is basically receptive to speech. So you can see here in line 3 to 5 that Pepper is receptive to the human's answer 7. So the question is, how satisfied are you with your health? Participant answers 7, and then Pepper does the understanding check. You say that your satisfaction with your health gets the grade 7. Is that correct? And then the human responds, correct, no, sorry, yeah. And centrally, so in response to the understanding check, which is a yes-no question, the human is rephrasing the correct to yeah, which is an adaptation of the word selection that this participant has learned to produce in response to this question. And he also displays accountability, apologizing, sorry, and also embodying something like oops, embarrassment for getting it wrong. So at this, with this repair, the participant has restored the interaction, and Pepper moves on to the next question. So this is a relatively smooth example of miscommunication and effective or successful repair. However, this is not what happens all the time, because this very single repair sequence, or repair even taking place within the same turn, it can actually become much larger and running over multiple sequences. This is, you can see the lady sitting there, she's holding a leaflet. This is a leaflet with the instructions that she has also been given verbally, orally by the nurse in the beginning of the interview. She's holding that and she will be reading from the sheet in a minute, as you can hopefully see. Okay, I'll play the video.
De volgende zin is: ik twijfel aan de zin van het leven.
Niet mee eens. Niet mee eens. Pepper, wat bedoel je?
Ik heb uw antwoord nog niet gehoord.
Niet mee eens.
Uw antwoord is niet mee eens. Begrijp ik dat goed?
Ja.
Dan gaan we naar de volgende zin.
Okay, this was a bit longer, but I'll play it again. I think we have time for that.
De volgende zin is: ik twijfel aan de zin van het leven.
Niet mee eens. Niet mee eens. Pepper, wat bedoel je?
Ik heb uw antwoord nog niet gehoord.
Niet mee eens.
Uw antwoord is niet mee eens. Begrijp ik dat goed?
Ja.
Dan gaan we naar de volgende zin.
Okay. So, as I said, this was a bit of a more complex, to say the least, fragment of miscommunication and repair. Let's run through the transcript. So first of all, the paper starts with this statement, I doubt the meaning of life. And then first we can see in line 4 that probably the participant, the lady, is reading from the tablet on Pepper's torso. This is very difficult. I mean, we are not certain about this. We should have actually used brackets here, but she might be saying twijfel or doubt. Then she provides her response, niet mee eens, not agreed. But there is a very lengthy silent non-response by Pepper, 5.3 seconds. So this is the common situation and the one I referred to earlier, humans repeating their answers. So that's what happens in line 9, treating the non-response basically as hearing trouble and then rephrasing or repeating, in this case including micropauses, not agreed. However, this is not successful. At least there's another very relatively lengthy silence, non-response by Pepper. So at this point, you could say progressivity is at stake. What to do? It is a kind of challenge for the participant how to resolve this apparent breakdown of the interaction. So what the woman does at that point, she doesn't really read from the paper, but at least she looks at it briefly and then uses the script formulation, what do you mean, in line 12. In fact, using this scripted command is leaving the repair sequence, stepping out of the current running repair sequence. However, this is again not successful. There's no response by Pepper. There's some bleeping, there's some gesture, but Pepper doesn't proceed. So at this point, you could say that the participant's repair initiation failed. What happens then is a kind of break, you could say, and Pepper starts something new. In fact, he reports hearing trouble, saying, I haven't heard your answer yet, in line 16. This is interesting because it's not related to the humans' turns in throughout, like from line 4 to 15, so to say. But it is a new sequence initiated by Pepper, which is arguably a case of other initiated repair. And the human aligns with this, produces a repeat with even more articulation, louder, and this is actually effective, so progressivity is restored and the interview continues upon the understanding check, etc. So this, in fact, you could say, is there were multiple non-responses by Pepper, which the human tried to resolve, which led to an escalation of trouble in the interaction. One strategy was to repeat the answer. Another one was to use the script, what do you mean? But both are unsuccessful. And eventually progressivity is restored with Pepper reporting hearing trouble. Now I'll show you a last example, which is another case of relatively complex miscommunication and also a very special kind of repair, you could say.
De volgende vraag. Hoe tevreden bent u met uw veiligheidsgevoel?
10. 10. Helemaal progressief. 10. Ik doe dat.
U zegt dat u een tevredenheid met uw veiligheidsgevoel het cijfer 0 krijgt. Begrijp ik dat goed?
Nee.
Dan heb ik het verkeerd verstaan. Dan herhaal ik de vraag. Hoe tevreden bent u met uw veiligheidsgevoel?
9.
U zegt dat u een tevredenheid met uw veiligheidsgevoel het cijfer 9 krijgt. Is dat juist?
Ja.
De volgende vraag.
Okay, I'll play it once more.
De volgende vraag. Hoe tevreden bent u met uw veiligheidsgevoel?
10. 10. Helemaal progressief. 10. Ik doe dat.
U zegt dat u een tevredenheid met uw veiligheidsgevoel het cijfer 0 krijgt. Begrijp ik dat goed?
Nee.
Dan heb ik het verkeerd verstaan. Dan herhaal ik de vraag. Hoe tevreden bent u met uw veiligheidsgevoel?
9.
U zegt dat u een tevredenheid met uw veiligheidsgevoel het cijfer 9 krijgt. Is dat juist?
Ja.
De volgende vraag.
Okay, let's
De vol-
look at the transcript. To begin with, I should say that there is a companion in the room and she also participates in line 13, as you can see. Sorry, but this is the only interview where a companion was present actually, and yeah, as we can see, it is relevant. Pepper poses the question, how satisfied are you with your sense of safety? And the human responds a 10 in line 5. There's no response for 2.3 seconds, and then the human repeats or actually rephrases because she drops the article 10 in line 7. But again, no response from Pepper. So what should have come is the understanding check. At that point, the human assesses Pepper, repeating, so the completely befuddled is a kind of assessment of Pepper, probably referring also to his eyes and gaze, basically. And then again repeats the answer 10 in line 10, even louder. What we see then is in line 13, the companion acknowledging the assessment, there's laughter, and then Pepper does formulate the human's answer, but he misheard it basically because he repeats naught or checks the understanding of naught rather than 10, asking, do I understand that correctly in line 17? And the human denies because it's far from correct. It's the other extreme of the scale, basically. So what happens then is the recycling of the question. First, Pepper marks this as miscommunication, then I misheard you, then I repeat the question, announcing the recycling of the question, and goes, how satisfied are you with your sense of safety in line 26, repeating the survey question. Now this time, the woman answers 9 rather than 10. This, in fact, treats the acoustics of 10 as the trouble source, and the earlier attempts to repair the repetition of A10 to 10 and again 10 is now repaired to 9. So basically revising the answer. This is picked up correctly by Pepper in line 32. You say your satisfaction with sense of safety gets the grade 9. Is that correct? And this is correct, so progressivity is restored again, and they move on to the next question. So basically, one strategy of solving trouble, hearing trouble, is rephrasing. But there is a limit to rephrasing in survey interviews, because how to say 10 differently, which is obviously similar for other numbers on the scale of 1 or 0 to 10. So basically what this participant does is giving up on repair. So not repairing her initial answer, but settling with an alternative answer. And you could say this is the second best answer, which is successful in restoring the progressivity of the interview. Okay, so now I've given you a couple of examples of the types of miscommunication and also the complexity of miscommunication and ways to resolve the miscommunication in these interviews. Now, I would like to provide you with an overview of the types of miscommunication we found. Basically, these are the 4 strategies that we encountered that resemble what we know about repair mechanisms in social interaction. So the articulated repeats of answers, which consisted of a higher volume, emphasis, micropauses, etc. These are the ways to articulate answers in a repeated way. Rephrasings were also relatively frequent, 51 cases. We saw the case of klopt or correct repair to yeah, but there are some other examples of that, versions of that. And these orient to recipient design or show the adaptation to the specific robot that Pepper is. And having learned that a particular kind of answer like klopt doesn't work in this context, so these are a ground for rephrasing answers. There are very few instances of other initiated repair in direction of the robot Pepper, something like I don't know what you mean, but also 2 instances of the human drawing non-verbally Pepper's attention by clicking or waving or doing other things to somehow get a response from Pepper. But as I said, there is more. So that's why that on the top of the table, I didn't put repair strategies, but human strategies in the context of miscommunication, which is vaguer and broader, because we also saw instances of skip the question, also to escape from a kind of blocked or interrupted flow of the interaction. And the option, what do you mean, which we did see in the example just now. We also saw an example of, in fact, confirming an inaccurate, sorry, we didn't see that answer. We saw the example 8, the providing of an alternative answer, 9 rather than 10, but there are also cases where Pepper repeats or uses the incorrect answer in his understanding check, which is then confirmed. So settling with a wrong answer, you could say. So these are the ways to deal with miscommunication and repair in the context of survey interviews. What can we conclude from this? Well, overwhelmingly humans repeat and rephrase. Arguably, these are cases of self-initiated self-repair, mostly with Pepper's very lengthy silences or non-responses as the trouble source, but they also occur in overlap, situations of overlap where humans repeat their answer after the overlap. We also saw the rephrasing as an orientation to recipient design or the adaptability, which was also found and reflected on by Hanna Pelikan and Matthias Broth. This is interesting because recipient design in survey interviews has been discussed before as an aspect of the interviewer, adapting questions to the specific moment in the interview and the specific recipient. But here it seems to be the other way around, the human or the interviewee, you could say, designing answers for the specific robot. Also, very interestingly, we found this escalation of trouble from repeat to multiple repeats to second best answers, wrong answers, no answers, as a salient aspect. Also, probably because it's difficult in this interaction with the robot to let go of, to let trouble pass, basically. So when the robot hasn't, so this you can only do this when the robot repeats your or got the wrong answer, you can settle with the wrong answer and let it pass in a way. But this doesn't happen very frequently. The non-responses, you can't wait forever. There's a limit to that. And that's why the human is more or less forced to do something in that situation. So eventually, progressivity, you could say, is prioritized over accuracy, especially in the cases of second best or wrong or no answers, obviously. And this may affect survey outcomes, although, as you have probably seen, it's not very frequent, so it doesn't probably impact too much on the outcomes. Now, we may wonder, was Pepper in these interviews able to have a half-decent coherent interaction with these humans? Well, first of all, I guess we can say it's maybe good enough for the survey context, but then I'm probably being very mild. We could also say, on a different level, overall, we saw instances of repair occurring every 2 minutes in these interviews. So in a way, less frequent than in social interaction. This is a very loose and imprecise measure, of course, but it may give you an indication of the frequency overall across these interviews. And we may also want to think about potential design implications on the basis of our analysis. So one of the things we think needs to be done is to reduce these lengthy silences. And in one of the examples, we saw the strategy applied by Pepper. I haven't heard your answer yet. So apparently this is already programmed into the robot, and why not use this action, robot action, a bit earlier? Another recommendation maybe is that designers could think of escape options. We saw the woman using the "what do you mean" question in a situation where the progressivity was at stake. But this is not accurate in a way, because she was not really asking what Pepper meant. She was just escaping from the sequence. So alternatively, something like "something went wrong" or some other kind of command could be programmed into the robot. It's just one of the ideas. And I think you, because I showed you the clips twice, you might have had a chance to have a proper look, or more or less proper. And a few of the things that we are interested in still for future examination, this was the wrong order, are features of embodied behavior. First of all, by the human. We haven't really got into that yet, but we see cases of humans leaning forward, which may have to do with reading from the tablet screen, but also the waving and clicking, things that probably are specific to a social robot like Pepper, rather than a voice agent like Alexa or Siri or whatever. And then also Pepper's embodied behavior, because this is more or less standard, a standard option to use that in programming this kind of robots. But one of the salient things in looking at these fragments is that Pepper is making some gestures and moving his head during a lengthy silence. And the question is then obviously, what does this do interactionally? So this is for future studies, in fact. Okay, then I don't know how I'm in the time. I think it's quite okay. So I would like to end by thanking you for listening, and I would also like to thank and acknowledge my collaborators, Linde Rijk and Roel Bouwmans. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Dr. Stommel. Thank you so much for a fascinating talk. So the floor is now open for questions. Okay, okay, brilliant. Jessica, please kick us off.
I thank you so much, by the way, for this presentation. Really fascinating. I know you mentioned this as something for future research, but it struck me immediately, and so I was hoping maybe you could speculate a little bit about Pepper's embodied behavior, because I thought it was really noticeable and intriguing. And I think in one of the analyses, you did make a brief comment that suggested that maybe some part of the embodied behavior might have become a resource in the repair. And so maybe you could talk a bit more about that and other things that maybe you've just casually seen in terms of some of this embodied behavior, even if you haven't done a full analysis yet, just things you've noticed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to be honest, I really can't say too much about it yet. So we do have some indications maybe at some points, like this could be a response to basically Pepper's gaze. But the gestures, they seem so arbitrary to me that it's really hard. There's no participant orientation, like very obvious orientation to Pepper's gesture or head movements. So I think it is puzzling to us and probably also to the participants. Like, what does this do? But this is definitely something. I mean, I know that Pepper is also able to move across the room, and he doesn't do it in this specific setting, but it is possible. It might also depend on people's experience with Pepper robots, but I guess that in our research, the participants had never encountered a Pepper robot in their life. So, well, yeah, I must admit, I really can't say much more about it at this point, but it is definitely an interesting aspect. And I think it will be a hard job really analyzing this and finding evidence for what this behavior, what this embodied behavior actually does, or how it affects the interaction. I don't know. Maybe you have an idea, actually.
I definitely found myself being really intrigued by it. And I think if I were in the interaction, I would have been paying attention to it and trying to figure out what it was doing. And eventually I did start to wonder, is it just arbitrary? Is it sort of just a set of patterns that have been programmed into the robot? And if so, what was the logic of the people who decided to do that? Yeah, you may not know that, but I found it very, very curious.
I think there is one thing that they did intentionally design, and that's this kind of, I don't know if you can see something like this, when Pepper is doing the understanding check, if I remember correctly. So because I know from developers talking to them that they think that this is how people explain things, right? So that's one of the things, but it's not very analytically grounded.
Well, that's really great, and I look forward to hearing about that when you get into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Dr. Stommel. Thank you for this fascinating talk. And I think we still have time for questions. Any questions, comments? Oh, yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Elizabeth, please.
Yeah, hi guys. It was a great talk. Let me try and I hope you can hear me. My internet's a bit shaky. Well, I guess I have a couple of questions. One of them is that you started with the quote, the sort of provocation quote, and I wondered what you think of another provocation quote, because I love this tweet from Sid Harrell, who's a UX design kind of person, and she wrote last year this tweet. I'll put it in the chat, but it said, "Volcanic take. Most conversational interfaces underperform well-structured web forms while costing many multiples. The fun industry story of one day and at scale is not going to pan out for most use cases." I'll stick it in the chat. And I just wondered what you thought about that, because your talk made me think of that, because obviously Pepper was delivering a survey, and I suppose like one question was, well, it's kind of nice to have Pepper doing this, but what do you actually think about people giving information this way versus on a really well designed form?
Okay, I'll first have to read the quote because I couldn't follow it listening to you.
Yeah, it's in the chat there. Yeah.
Yeah. So the fun industry. Oh, that's the second one. Okay.
She's basically saying, I think, like it's so less effective and efficient than actually giving somebody a really well-designed survey. Why are we doing this?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it's also something that we have asked ourselves time and time again, because it's kind of striking that these participants on a 1 to 10 scale rated this robot 7 point something. So they were really quite positive about the interaction with the robot. While us looking at it, we think, oh no, this is so embarrassing, just stop it. It's almost killing these silences. But yeah, so I would definitely prefer a written form, but there is an argument to make, maybe because of health literacy and reading problems. It's for some people it might be quite hard to actually fill out a written form. And interestingly, this Roel, my colleague from Radboud, he also recorded these interviews done by nurses. So if that's the alternative, a nurse sitting at a table with a participant, collaboratively filling out this form, then obviously this is much more efficient. And yeah, so if the alternative is a written form, I would definitely recommend that. But if the alternative is an actual person of flesh and blood sitting across the table, then okay, maybe this is an option. Yeah. But I think I agree with the quote. Yeah.
Can I ask another one if there isn't another hand up? I can't tell if there's another hand up though.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know that Charles is here, but he's put in the chat that he was not able to hear the audio today. So this was actually a question that sprang to mind about Charles's research, which is, and it's connected to the answer that you just gave, really, which is that in the case where the respondent goes with 9 rather than 10, it just reminded me of Charles's work where he's looking at how people reformulate questions on forms so that people can give answers, but then those answers are kind of consequential for what down the line support they might get, or what they might be entitled to, or what they're diagnosed as. And so although yeah, I can really actually see the case for using something like a Pepper to talk to people who might not be able to read a form, but it, and I think also, there's a bit of a novelty value. It's kind of entertaining to be chatted to by a robot, but if the robot is asking the wrong questions or can't understand basic answers, and then the person has to work around and reformulate to the detriment of themselves in some way that we can't ever know. I think it's great that you're doing this, because it kind of exposes these problems, which people probably don't imagine. They can't conjure them up in their head.
Yeah, no, definitely. And in this setting, these are basically low-stake interviews, because it's not. Maybe there's a fun factor as well, but it's also for research purposes. So these people are doing the researcher a favor rather than that any kind of support depends on the outcomes of this survey. So definitely, and at the same time, there's this study by Tracy Walker, I think, and colleagues on this virtual agent diagnostic tool, which is very successful. And I do think in that context, the outcome does matter, I guess. I mean, I don't know the details of their study, but in a way, yeah, they were also, well, it was a bit different, because it was basically an automatic analysis of people's spoken responses to diagnostic questions, and the automatic analysis was rather good. But no, I totally agree, and I also totally agree on the reformulation of questions. But I think that's an interesting twist that we see here, that in like human-led survey interviews, it is actually the interviewer adapting to the recipient, and here it's the recipient adapting to the machine. I mean, that's a kind of reversal, which is doubtful, at least. Yeah. Okay, I guess that was Charles' question.
Thank you, Dr. Stommel. I have a question, maybe a little bit off the topic. I just wondering, did the participants show their impatience or awkward when the paper has the hearing troubles more than once? The participants need to repeat or rephrase their questions maybe more than once.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because obviously this is also a kind of speculative interpretation, but I think on the basis of the increased volume and very explicit emphasis and articulation, that is interpretable as irritation or frustration or something like that. So yes, definitely. And also to make a maybe inappropriate comparison, but on the other hand, in cases of hearing trouble, people talking to hard of hearing people do not tend to repeat in this way. I mean, intuitively, I know situations in which you will repeat more than once, and this kind of irritation or marked response in a way, or marked repeat, can impact the interaction quite a lot, and it doesn't in these cases, because Pepper would never pick up on that specific aspect of a repeat, obviously. What I found interesting is that people talking to hard of hearing people, they might let the repair opportunity pass, basically, for the sake of, not repairing all the time, which is a burden on the interaction. And that doesn't happen here. It has to be repaired. You can't move on without, there is no moving on unless Pepper did pick up something and you just go for the wrong answer. Yeah.
Thank you. I just okay, thank you. Just Googled the Pepper yesterday, and it say Pepper can perceive emotions and adapts his behavior to the mood of the human around him. So I just wonder if whether Pepper is aware of his hearing troubles, and whether Pepper perceives participants' emotional reactions, maybe like the impatience and the awkwardness.
Well, that's a good one. This Pepper robot at least is not doing facial recognition on that emotional level, but I know that there are quite a lot of attempts, at least, to implement that, of which I would be very skeptical, but also interesting to see how it would work effectively in the interaction. So no, it doesn't have that. And what else did I want to say? So what did you say? Detection in the, like emotion detection, and what else? You mentioned something else.
The emotional reaction, and maybe Pepper can aware of such kind of emotional, and I just wonder whether Pepper can perceive such reactions, and maybe the participants show their impatience or awkwardness, and Pepper maybe perceives such emotion and reaction.
Yeah, well, this Pepper robot is not able to do any such thing. I mean, in that sense, it's very simple. But yeah, it would be extremely interesting to see if advancements in technology, how that would actually work out in the interaction. But we do think that Pepper could probably and relatively simply be programmed to intervene or to do something after a particular time to resolve or to basically prevent these very awkward, lengthy silences, plus presumably irritation, frustration, and all of that. So to basically do something about, or trying to prevent people to become impatient, I guess you could at least signal something like, I'm processing, because obviously these glowing ears and eyes are not clear signals of processing as a kind of apology or excuse for not responding or not doing anything at that point. So that's also a very interesting question. Is there any alternative to glowing ears and eyes to resolve or to disambiguate basically that there is a non-response or a long silence.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for Dr. Stommel. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Welcome to share.
I see some comments in the chat, but I'm not sure whether I should track them from the top or where to start reading. Robot doesn't do reformulation. Nice. That's Charles. Suggests unable to identify location of error or means of solution. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything you want to add, Dr. Stommel?
No, I don't think so. But of course, thanks again for listening, and it was very nice being in your seminar series. And I hope to attend future lectures and sessions if possible.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Elizabeth, I saw your hand up. Is there any other questions you want to say?
I just was, the one other thing that I was thinking straight away, but maybe you already covered this a bit, is about self-initiated self-repair from the robots. And given that that's the most common thing that humans do, it's really, again, noticeable that the robot doesn't do that. And I wondered what you thought about that, especially under the sort of broad heading of repair, because obviously it's only a very, very limited type of repair that's happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think we really addressed that. But yeah, it would be very, very interesting and probably make the robot look more human-like. So this could randomly be added to programmed into the robot, but very doubtful at the same time. I mean, is this really how we want robots to be? But yeah, thanks. That's a very interesting question. Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Dr. Stommel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. In particular, thanks to you, Dr. Stommel, and for your time. Thank you, everyone here, and happy Friday. Have a good weekend, and thank you, everybody, and many thanks again to you, Dr. Stommel.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice weekend.